Well, it's still not going to the. Says it's going to the headphones. Well, has anybody else been able to get here? Usually they're already on.
Well, nothing's up there except the big blue switch.
Okay.
No other, that's such a rod, and usually is up there. What I can.
Okay, now is it up?
Yeah, but the only thing I see is your face.
Yeah. I wonder if this is coming in on a different channel than it's been before, and so nobody else is here.
I don't see anybody with that, and there's nothing on here except you. Right, the entire street is you. Now there's the pages up there, but I don't see any sign of anybody.
Well, that's the page. It's just I'm not sharing it on the screen. So let me go back and see. No, I get the same screen. Oh. Were we supposed to be off for a week somewhere?
Were you?
I don't know.
See them. No,
I didn't-
instead of the 24th.
Because of Thanksgiving, I didn't think we did take off a week in the middle. Well, let me see here. I can send some emails right quick. See if I get any response from anybody. Well, I say I can send an email. Uh, Still nobody on here.
No, nobody on the screen.
Well, nobody's responded to my email yet. Well. No, here's what I need to be.
Kimberly and Shay, they know you.
She's coming up
No, just first name.
on the screen.
Email. Oh.
Hello, Kimberly. This is Daer Platt. Are you trying to get on and not have any luck? Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
She went.
You got it? Yes, I see you now. KK,
Yes.
Okay. Yes, mine works that way sometimes too. Okay, let me catch one of the others and see if I can reach them. I'll hang up. Thanks.
She wasn't having enough.
Mhm. No, she just realized what time it was. So it's working. So they must not, for whatever reason. Okay. Well, let's see.
Ah, come on. They don't get anything from anybody.
Well, here's a text from 832. That must be John Lynn that I just tried to call.
Hey, Mr. Platt, it's Angie.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm out sick with a cold today, so I'm joining on Zoom.
Okay. I had to use a new link to set this thing up with because it disappeared on me last week and I wasn't sure that it would work. So now that it worked, we can go to work.
There's Angie.
Yeah, that was her talking.
She said.
But no, but I still don't know why I'm not getting better control of my sound.
There's Kimberly and Angie.
Yeah.
Was she having trouble getting on?
No, I don't know. She didn't say.
Okay.
Okay. Now I've got a whole bunch of stuff up here that I don't know what in the world it is. Okay. Here we go.
Are they both online?
And they're both online now. Let me see if I can get this to go to the bottom. There we go. And then I can just work with it on the bottom. No, that won't work that way. Smith in the book does a long discussion about the development of Buddha himself, and even introduces Buddhism in terms of Buddha himself. So we're going to look at a little bit of the history of that origin, and then there's a page in the work that I sent about its expansion, and then we'll look at a couple of its essential ideas, which are pretty obvious when you see how it develops.
Now, Keith Johnson's name, Kevin's name.
Kevin's came in, okay. In the mid 500 years before Christ, Hinduism has reached into many respects a crisis. There are a number of reforms that develop. Remember, in the initial Vedas of Hinduism, the original religion was a priestly centered ritual religion. In the 5th century, with the developments of followers that give us the documents that we saw as the Upanishads, you have a different understanding, more philosophically oriented, more morally practical life entered. It's in this era when the Jains take the asceticism and intensify it and emerge as a different group. And it's at this same time that Siddhartha Gautama comes up with his understanding of how to deal with this world's affairs. He grew up in a clearly Hindu environment because that was the religion of the country. The story is that it was foretold at his birth, or actually at his gestation, that he would either be a great national political leader of India, or he would have a wider agenda that would make him a world leader. According to the story, in order to make sure that that would happen, his father saw to it that he never experienced any bad thing. His father was plenty wealthy to see that that didn't happen. The story is that he began to be restless and conned one of his consorts, bodyguards, to let him go out. And while his father had let him out before, he always let him out after the guys had gone down the road and cleared it all out from anything that would be bad. On 3 trips, one, he saw a very, very diseased person. In one place, he saw a very, very old, decrepit person, and in another place, he saw a corpse. In some of the stories, on a 4th trip, he sees a Hindu monk who has renounced everything and is perceived to be quite blissful. Troubled by what he's found and the evidence now that he's confronted with that even if you're wealthy, you can get sick and die. And even if you're wealthy and you don't get sick and die, you're going to get old and decrepit. He became so obsessed with this despair, maybe, that he leaves his wife and attaches himself to some yogas, some Hindu gurus for several years, concludes as he's learned everything from them that they can teach him. He goes and joins a band of absolutely extreme ascetics, down to the point in the story, as Smith tells it, he's eating like a couple of grains of rice a day, and would have died had not somebody almost force fed him. And so now he takes a typical Hindu turn, which of course in Hinduism is not a turn at all. He goes into intense meditation, which is the Hindu solution. In this world, there is nothing that you can necessarily trust. He's learned all the wisdom that they could teach him, and the wisdom that he teaches him has pointed him inward. In order to find the truth, you're going to have to get close to whatever spiritual reality there is. And that you can only find in yourself. And it's during one of these extended sessions, in one of the stories, he even tells his disciples, or a couple of his friends, that something important is going to happen, and if it doesn't, it'll all be over. After some intense meditation time, he realizes that he's awakened to the truth. He catches it, he understands it, he perceives the real kernel of truth about human existence, life in this world. And this awakenedness, this enlightenment, is the Hindu word, the Sanskrit word, Buddha. For those of you that want an inside joke, this makes Buddha the original woke person, which is now one of the popular socio-political terms. But in spite of the fact that he now has gotten it, he's figured it out, or he's been given the truth, and in subsequent stories, there are elaborations of the visions that he saw during this great meditation period, and this enlightenment is attributed to one and more of the gods. So this isn't something he achieved. This is a gift given to him, and therefore he can't use it simply for his own escape from this world. And so he stays. Now, do you recognize this as the final stage of life in the traditional Hindu stages of life. The childhood, the student, the family, the community, the retirement. And in retirement, you engage in spiritual renewal and you reach this place of enlightenment where you could leave, i.e., check out, just let yourself die and achieve the end result, or you could stay and be a teacher. So in this respect, Buddha is simply a good Hindu. His approach, his ability to explain it, to help people grasp it, apparently was so prolific that he has a 45-year ministry that is highly convincing to a wide number of people. And so there is an initial flourish of Buddhism as an independent way of thinking, but gradually, with other revivals in Hinduism that revigorate it, Buddhism in India in the 9th century or so begins to take a decline numerically as a distinct religious philosophical worldview, and for some is absorbed back into Hinduism as simply one of the paths of being a good Hindu. When he dies, very little has been written. He's as I said, apparently a very, very effective speaker, teacher, dialogue, influencer, what's the word I want for one who helps a group work through ideas, facilitate. And it's on this premise that this way of life really begins to flourish in those first several centuries. But his ministry is almost all verbal. In this respect, he's like Jesus. He himself writes very little. And it's nearly 100 years after his death that they begin to try to collect his teachings. And they finally come up with a collection of 3 baskets of teaching, a canon that is pretty much the written basis of the faith as it then emerges. But by the time there is 200 years afterwards, an attempt to formalize themselves a little bit more, there are already so many differences among them that they begin to divide and subdivide into various traditions. I've seen lists now that have up to 30 different groups that are within that. The 2 major groups are the ones who follow him most closely, although the reality is, as I note a little bit further down, after the expansion, it's really difficult to isolate the original views and the practices, because even these initial writings were compilations of followers 150 years after him. So you have the main traditional stereotypical Buddhist, which requires a very intense monastic discipline. They're monks in our terms. Great deal of meditation and teaching and discipline, and these are the yellow-robed Buddhists. They spread all across South India, Sri Lanka, into Burma, Thailand, where in some places they're still the dominant form of typical organized Buddhism. It takes a few centuries for the recognition that while there are some real values in his system, it's way too it takes way too much intensive discipline for the vast majority of people to even think about doing. And so there begins to be a reform, which now becomes the big raft, far less ascetic, therefore open far more to people, lay people in ordinary life activities. You do certain of the things, the meditations, the prayers, etc. And this, of course, involves far more of the religion. That's in the areas where into Burma, where there is some blending with it, and Zoroastrianism, and even certain Christian groups
The 3 links. And
Yeah.
they just-
Okay. Everybody still there?
They're all.
Yes.
Okay. Um, barely. I don't know what happened. Obviously, there was some kind of a break. My computer is also indicating that it may be running out of juice for some reason. So as long as we're hung up here,
Your internet was breaking up like within the last 3 to 5 minutes before you got disconnected.
okay. Let me get all hooked up back here again, and then let's see. I guess we're gonna have to change our internet service, maybe. This expansion of Buddhism, as you can see by the dates, is looking at a whole number of centuries. They, like Buddha himself, become teachers. And so there's not only the expansion of Buddhism by people who were enthusiast followers of their own reasons. There it comes again. But there are actually people who went for the very purpose of teaching this. So it spreads into China, where it's synchronized with Taoism and Confucianism. In the 9th century, it's persecuted and its monasteries are confiscated, but it develops in China its own specialized forms of particularly meditation, what we know in the Western world as Zen, which is a Japanese form of Buddhism, has its counterpart, or before it gets to Japan, in China. It goes into Korea. Where it becomes a dominant religion, is significantly synchronistic in terms of religiously adopting a lot of the mythologies, practices of the indigenous religions that are already in China. It goes into Tibet, again, under patronage of the king, and a very famous missionary from India. It actually goes back into India from Burma, from Tibet. And it's here in Tibet that you get the form that is probably most widely, popularly known, not only in the United States, but around the world, in the Dalai Lama, who has been, of course, by the communist Chinese forced out of Tibet. So with a couple of different approaches. His first approach for the the initiation and the growth of Buddhism is as reform to the difficulties of Hindu religion as it has crystallized in his day. Operation. The caste system had been initiated by them and was rigidly controlled. The teachings of Hinduism was fundamentally centered by these Brahmin priests in the Vedic writings that were in Sanskrit, and in Buddha's day, ordinary people had already transitioned in their language. They didn't know Sanskrit anymore. And so both the exclusive centralized authority of the Brahmin faith, you just do what you're told, and the caste system, which had all kinds of bad elements to it, especially, of course, if you were one of the bottom castes. Buddha reacts against all of that. He sees the need for an individual, because if this great discovery you see can only come by internalized, intense meditation, you can't do this as a group. You have to do this as a person. Now, a group can help you do it, but you still have to take real responsibility. The group can't make you do the meditating. They can show you how to do it. They can teach you the principles of how to do it, but they can't make you do it. So he takes a very personalized approach, individualistic, as opposed to this outwardly controlled system. The Brahmin Hinduism, on the one hand, was very ritualistic, which is almost mechanical, and certainly can be done just mechanically. It had adopted much of the indigenous magic, which again is automatic, is mechanical. If you got the right formula of ingredients to put together, you're going to get an established result. If you know the right words to say in the right order, in the right tone, you'll get the results. Against, Buddha's even tried some of this stuff. For him, there was, you see, no magic potion. There was no drug. There was no ritual. There was no practice that helped him get where he was. And so here's another angle for breaking with, getting free from this priestly controlled religion of its day. The Upanishads, as an internal reaction to this ritualized, magic-oriented, are very philosophically oriented. Which involves a lot of abstraction. And Buddha wasn't interested in speculation. In fact, there are many who would claim and insist that Buddhism in its purest form, especially with Buddha and those most strict followers of him, is not a religion at all, because it doesn't have the religious elements of ritual, of doctrine, of teaching. He was interested in how do I figure out how to live with some degree of satisfaction, some significant degree of acceptance, of tolerance, of bliss in this world that doesn't have any of that. And so he was not interested in the ritual. He was not interested in the speculative philosophy. He was interested in what can I do to produce practical results in my own life. He what was not interested in that you could not deal with on a practical basis. What are the components of a human being? What is the nature of this spirit world? Is it personal? Is it abstract? Buddha's response is, well, there's not hardly any way you'll know. And therefore, why waste your time trying to cope with this? Let's figure out what we have to do. He's not even sure, because how be of our nature. How can you prove that you're a real spiritual being temporarily housed in this physical body? As a Hindu, he grew up in a culture that accepted that as a reality and repeated cycles of transmigration. That's reincarnation by a different word. But since there's no way you could prove that, then there's no point in discussing it, no point in quibbling over it, no point in worrying about it. He had to believe, given his whole experience, that mankind, individuals, people, have some capacity to change at least one's perception of one's experience. You may not be able to reduce the suffering, but at least you can change how you think and feel about it and how it affects you, negatively or positively. And therefore, he was driven to the conclusion that karma, which is the abiding principle of the values, whatever they are, of spiritual reality, can't be absolute in their control. Otherwise, there would be no point in your going to all this effort to positively cope with your existence. This sixth point, that the gods were mortal and subject to karma and rebirth, I'm not sure whose list that came from. I leave it in there because you'll see it, but I can't hardly believe that he held this to any degree at all, because it appears that this is a whole topic that he's not even interested in discussing. The conclusions that he grasped in this moment of awakening are the Four Noble Truths. And it's interesting how these get framed. For instance, in this first one here, which starts with the components of our existence as being impermanent and transitory. And that's simply the fact that we all were born and we're all going to die. He doesn't know anybody. Nobody else knows anybody that didn't die. He's not interested in debating, speculating, as they said, as to exactly what this is: spirit, soul, mind, body, jinn, and all those speculations that are going around as a part of Hinduism. But he does see that not only are we transitory, impermanent, but we're filled with suffering. Bodily, mentally, emotionally, consciously, subconsciously. And his discussion, his thinking about suffering is a very, very broad scope. For it includes not just actual hurting over something, but he goes back to what we saw in Hinduism as the lack of any fulfillment. And you'll notice Smith takes pages to point out that this is a very widespread, if not universal, human experience. And I don't know how many different people, even in the West, religious, literary, philosophical, he quotes their expressions of, there aren't very many times in my life when I could really genuinely, that I had any real sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment. And you see the negative of this, even in the Christian faith, at least for the non-Christian, who organized Christianity has declared is fundamentally flawed, depraved. His ancestor Adam and Eve fell in the garden, and we've been born into a human nature that is flawed and therefore cannot achieve the full human measure. The great Augustine is the one who phrased the idea that we were born as the image of God, and we will never feel fulfillment until we have a meaningful relationship with him. Buddha's experience, you see, in a home that had everything for his day. I mean, anything he wanted that was available in his day, he could have. In fact, in many cases, it was provided for him before he asked for it. Wonderful wife, child, extended family, well off, power, significance, influence, and yet he didn't feel completed. So he's not talking about just terrible suffering. Because in fact, you see, the extensive asceticism of the discipline that they impose does in fact produce actual physical suffering. His insight, which again, we saw premonitioned in Hinduism, is that we have this emptiness because of our private, personal desires, interests, which we are willing to pursue at the expense of other individuals, of the family, of the clan, of the community. And so again, you see, there's this Christian idea that we're flawed. The problem starts within us, what we desire. Chocolate, gravy on our rice, warm clothes in the winter, cool clothes in the summer. Run the gamut of physical, spiritual, psychological, social desires, cravings that we have, in the pursuit of which we create all kinds of wrong, not only for ourselves, but for other people. We want too much of it too fast or whatever. And therefore, the solution is to overcome these individualistic desires and all of the disappointment and the disillusionment that arises when they don't get fulfilled. To lose totally self-interest. And you saw that in Hinduism as well. And thus, eventually, to be integrated, absorbed, connected deeply with ultimate universal reality. However, whatever that is. And very soon, he developed the formula for how to do that. And this is what he taught. The 8 steps. We can introduce these tonight.
You got time or you running in?
We've only got about, well, we actually don't. We're supposed to quit at 8:10. Well, let's look at them right quick and then we'll come back to them. You have to have the right views. You have to have the right truths. You have to have the right thinkings. You have to have the right interest. That is passion. Won't do any good if you have the right ideas if you're perfectly willing to sit on the couch and watch them. You have to learn how to talk about them in the right way. And this is particularly a problem because we fall so easily into mistruths, untruths. Then you have to act the right way. You have to be focused, you see, on not yourself, but those outside. What is the right way to act toward others? And so he has his 5 basic rules that you should never do. You should have the right livelihood, which it turns out, of course, in the real way he did it then for his 45 years of ministry and his closest followers had to do is you didn't have a livelihood at all in terms of yourself. You belonged to a monastic order and you carried a bowl for 1 meal a day, which somebody gave you. The right mindfulness is a persistence of all of this that precedes. And then ultimately that should lead you to real understanding and insights. We'll look at that. And then you have to have the right concentration, which, guess what, is one of the yogas. And so you have the traditional stereotypical Buddhist is a monk who does nothing but meditate, and or if he's good enough, he considered good enough by others, teach what he's learned. Okay. That'll get you enough to think of where Smith elaborates on this reaction against Hinduism. And how that affects the monastic order that he creates. And then how he recognizes that all of those 8 elements of Brahman religious faith practice that he reacts against, or was it just 6, that he reacts against, have in fact re-emerged in ordinary everyday life Buddhism, because they have temples with rituals and so forth. Okay. Anybody want to venture? Or have I possible? Okay. We will see you next week and talk more about these aspects of the faith as it's then practiced and lived out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go Expos.
Yes,
y'all,
game on tomorrow.
you all have a good night.
You too. Have a blessed week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Angie, are you still doing the commercials?